I apologize in advance because I know some of you loved these albums, but if you ask me, these were the most disappointing and overrated metal releases of 2022.
Disappointed!
And we're starting off spicy all the way back in January with Shadow of Intent and Elegy. Now put your pitchforks away because I consider myself a big fan of this project and I didn't hate it or really any of the albums on this list. In fact, Intensified Genocide may be one of my favorite tracks of the year. I just don't think that it lived up to the high bar that was set by Melancholy. No doubt the orchestration here is fantastic thanks to the support of Flesh God Apocalypse's Francesco Farini, but when it comes to the riffs and the impressive level of vocal diversity I've come to expect from Ben Dur, it just falls short for me. Also, at just over an hour, I feel like it stretches itself a little bit thin after a while. Great atmosphere, it just didn't translate to highly memorable songs in my opinion. And God forbid we have those, right?
Don't ask questions. Just consume product and then get excited for next products.
Moving to another release I couldn't really understand all the praise for, we have Bloodbath with Survival of the Sickest. Now again, no shade here, because this is a rock-solid death metal album, but that's just the thing. I don't see it as anything more than that. I sampled it when I got the promo and wasn't really impressed enough to add it to my queue, but given how many people were shouting it out on release, I decided to circle back for another go. With all the fanfare, I expected to be completely blown away, but instead I was just left kind of shrugging my shoulders. Like most things, it's probably just down to personal taste. But we all know, no, if someone disagrees with you, that means they're an elitist and they're just trying to do clickbait, am I right? Either way, it's solid B-tier material in my mind. It goes hard and I can enjoy the listen, but I just don't really connect with it in any meaningful way. And side note, can we talk about that terrible font on the cover? Like, I assumed that was just for the promo, but that's actually what it looks like. Alright, this next one I didn't see a lot of overrated praise for, but was easily one of my biggest disappointments of the year, and that's Deathspell Omega with The Long Defeat.
I am come to bring death and destruction. Yes, the ordeal, this war is...
Deathspell Omega is probably one of my all-time favorite black metal bands, and each new release usually finds a spot on my best of the year list. But this time instead, I found myself really struggling to find enjoyment in it at all. I went back so many times hoping it was a grower, but ultimately very little stuck with me, and parts of this album are kind of a chore, honestly, to sit through.
My disappointment is immeasurable, and my day is ruined.
It has nothing to do with the vocalist changes either. I just find the compositions to be comparatively dull compared to their last few releases. Easily among my least favorite in their discography, and it got utterly blown away by the new Bluthaus Nord. Back to another solid but ultimately, again, overrated release in my opinion, we have Ibaraki with Rashomon. As a big fan of Ishan and someone who appreciates the guitar work of Trivium's Matt Heafy, their pairing was definitely one that intrigued me. I deeply respect the work that Matt is doing as acting as sort of a gateway to other styles of music for metalcore listeners, and compositionally there are a lot of cool moments to enjoy here. But it's far from the 10 out of 10 people seem to be calling it out to be. I was really hoping that Ishan would handle more of the vocals or that Matt would stick more to his cleans, especially considering they have similar qualities. But unfortunately he focuses more on his metalcore screams, which I've always found to be kind of grating. And sadly, that ends up tainting a lot of my enjoyment of this record, like green peppers on a pizza.
Not quite my tempo.
They take what honestly could have ended up in my top 10 and dragged it down to another B. Then we have Machinehead with Of Kingdom and Crown. Okay, I promise this will be the last time, at least for a while, that I talk about this album. But again, as I've said in my previous videos, I can understand, given the context of how many people hated the previous record and how spotty the Machinehead discography has been in general, why people would think this is something really great. But to me, even being among the best albums in their catalog barely rises above like a 7 for me. There are some really cool things happening here that I honestly wouldn't have expected, and Rob's singing is actually pretty solid, not to mention throwing in Vogue of Decapitated on guitar leads to some pretty tasty riffs. But similar to that last pick, Rob's harsh vocals infect pretty much everything else here, and I cannot stand most of his more yarly singing, and it doesn't help that he writes some of the cringiest lyrics I've ever heard. There's potential here, but it just doesn't come together. Next up, one that really pains me personally, and something that, again, I think is just more disappointing than overrated. We have Humours Principium Est with Liberate the Unborn Inhumanity.
With the money of the last hour, there is the life of darkness. With the power, keep the souls.
Yeah, I took this one kind of personally because I love this band and have repeatedly called them one of the most underrated bands, not only in melodic death metal, but probably metal in general. And I hope people can take this as proof that you can be like a huge fanboy of a band and also criticize things that you don't like that they do.
Inconceivable!
And in this case, I'm just rarely a fan of re-recordings. Sometimes it can work out, but these particular reimagined songs from the first 3 albums just give me the same vibe as like Star Wars reboots.
Star Wars, yeah! Star Wars!
The modern production robs them of all that classic nostalgic charm, and most of the adjustments to pacing and melody are definitely for the worse. Once more, please take the time to check these guys out for their new and classic releases alike, but don't make this your entry point. It's far from terrible, and maybe if you hadn't heard the original versions, you'd be perfectly fine with it, but yeah, it's just hard for me, and I think you'd be better served with the original versions. Alright, another one on the more sort of disappointing, not so much overrated side of things, we have Abbath with Dread Reaver. This is kind of a less exciting pick because there's not all that much that I expect when it comes to an Abbath record, but given my enjoyment of the previous 2 albums, I was at least expecting a fun and kind of campy black metal headbanger. And instead what we got was pretty much trash.
Garbage day! No!
Right from the singles, I was physically wincing at the new direction Abbath was taking with some of his vocals. Say what you will about that classic croak, but it's definitely better than whatever this is. The instrumentation is fine, but it's nothing to write home about either. I honestly can't remember a single riff off of this thing, and that should never be the case when it comes to our beloved Badger King. Now, this next one is another one that I largely did enjoy, but now let's talk about Soilwork with Övergivenheten. I think the issue here is another one regarding perhaps unrealistically high expectations. This is still a fantastically moody bit of progressive and melodic death metal, but the first 2 tracks set an impossibly high bar that they can never manage to recapture over the rest of this lengthy runtime. Hell, the title track may be one of my favorite tracks of the year and among the best the band has ever written, and also coming off of the incredible A Wisp of the Atlantic EP, I just expected more. Arguably the best album on this particular list, but it still just could have been better. Speaking again of the idea of an album that should be fun, but just came off as disappointing, Nekrogoblikon with the Fundamental Slimes and Humours.
Well, this is life, and we're living it right now!
Now, I try to avoid including smaller bands on more negative lists like this, so no, this is out of love. I had so much fun with Welcome to Bonkers, and the entire concept of their talk show with John Goblikon is such a creative and clever way to broaden the scope of their reach. But this album just wasn't it. After all of the wild and frankly bonkers instrumentation and stylistic shifts of the previous record, Slimes and Humours feels a little bland and lifeless, which are not the words that should come to mind with a band that has a fully costumed goblin as a mascot. It's not without its high points like Right Now, Yin, and This Is It, but overall I don't find myself excited to revisit it over and over again as I was with Bonkers. I'm rooting for these guys, so I just hope they do better next time. And then if you caught my full review of it, this last pick should come as no surprise with Lorna Shore's Pain Remains. Again, there is a lot to appreciate here, from the production to the performances, especially the breakneck drumming and Will Ramos's always changing vocal onslaught. The issue that I have here is that basically every song is the same. Not to mention the more rabid part of this fan base cannot take even mild criticism. Like, I gave this thing a B-, and I shared positives where they were due, but still people felt the need to cope so hard because God forbid anyone not love their god kings.
Oh, no, not the beast! Not the beast!
There are subtle differences in melody and extra breakdown here and there. Maybe the solo comes in earlier, but ultimately it's the same set of tools used over and over again for largely the same result. And if that's all that you want, that's fine, but I just expect a lot more, especially when everyone's raving about this being one of the best albums of the year. If you want a more in-depth analysis of this one, you can check out the dedicated video. Otherwise, you can share your most overrated albums below and check out this playlist for my favorite metal albums of 2022 so far. But that'll do it for now. Flight of Icarus signing off. I will see you in the trenches.